few verses I'd like us to look at. Feel free to just listen along. So this is Psalm 27, verse 4. One thing I ask of the Lord, this is what I seek, that I might dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to seek him in his temple. Psalm 42. As the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When can I go and meet with God? Psalm 84. How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord Almighty. My soul yearns, even faints, for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh cry out for the living God. Psalm 63. O God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My body longs for you in a dry and weary land where there is no water. I have seen you in the sanctuary and beheld your power and your glory. Because your love is better than life, my lips will glorify you. I will praise you as long as I live, and in your name I will lift up my hands. My soul will be satisfied as with the richest of foods. With singing lips my mouth will praise you. Those are just a selection of some of the Psalms that are describing this idea that God's people, their souls are longing and craving and seeking and pursuing, looking to gaze upon God's beauty, to thirst for him. And those are the ideas that we're trying to push as we're looking at some of the greats of the past. What does it look like to have your soul thirst for him? What does it look like to gaze on the beauty of the Lord? The two things that we looked at last week were these idea of going back into church history, back into our own traditions, to see how did the people who love God, who love the Bible, do this in the past. The second one that we were looking at last week is, given everything that's going on around us, whether it's centering prayer, contemplative prayer, mindfulness, evangelical mindfulness, how do we engage with that, given that so much of it has been filtered through Buddhism? And it's that idea that we want to pick up on tonight of, first of all, what is the Buddhism that it's been filtered through? But then once it's been filtered through, how do we engage with it? Do we reject the whole thing? Do we just blend with it? Or what does it look like to try and redeem some of this stuff? So if you've got this handout here, Jerry, if you flick on the screen, what we looked at last week, you might need to use the mouse. What we looked at last week were two things. One was this mutual gaze. And if you're searching back into how the church did this in years gone by, there are loads of things that we could look at, and maybe in the weeks ahead we will. The one part that I want to pick up on for this, did we lose that? Is the idea of, in the mutual gaze, there is not just understanding God, but understanding how God sees us. So being aware of ourselves in light of how God sees us. So that mutual gaze, and particularly when it comes to what do we do with mindfulness, it's that aspect of contemplating and communing with God that we want to pick up on, of actually by communing with God, I get to know him, but I also get to know myself through how he sees me. And then the second part is, how do we engage with something that is in our culture and seems to have been filtered through stuff that we don't like, but like so much of the Christian life has done that cultural engagement, whether it's Christmas or whether it's Christian funerals or whatever it is. And so if you have that handout, I'd like you to turn to this page, which is trying to get our heads around what Buddhism is. Jeremiah, give us one flick on there. I don't know if you have Buddhist friends, or if you've looked at any of the beliefs that Buddhists have. I'd like to just tear quickly through some of these so that you can understand what they mean by mindfulness when they talk about it. So we were talking about Thich Nhat Hanh and the influence that he's had both in Catholicism and in Western medicine. I don't know if you clocked, Marcus sent me a message last Friday night to say that the last week when we were talking about this, Thich Nhat Hanh actually passed away last Friday, hours before we were talking about this, at the age of 95. So his influence has been huge, and I'd like to get us a little bit of background on where his belief system and where Buddhism is coming from. So if you have this little handout, we're used of thinking about, what do you see when you see a chair, or this building, or the person beside you? Now, if you've been brought up around Christians your whole life, you might be thinking, Colin, like, what are you talking about? I see a chair, I see a building, and I see the person beside you. Well, that's because we've been shaped by a particular understanding that there is a great personal creator God out there who has made us and made people in the image of God and made the rocks and the plants and all that sort of thing. And God is personal God. He relates to us, and the chair is just made up of steel and fabric and foam or whatever else it's made up. And the person sitting beside you is made in the image of God and is precious and has dignity. If that's what you see, brilliant. That's what the Bible says you should see. But that's not what everybody sees. So if you look at the top of this sheet, you'll see a word called pantheism. Pantheism believes that there is a God and there is a world, and it's the same thing. That this world is an expression of God, but it's not a personal God. It's more like a force or an energy or an essence. So there's no personality to it. It's this force, and it is the world. That's not Buddhism, but it's pretty close to it. Buddhism is called panentheism, which is saying there is a divine essence. It's not a personal God. It's not a God you can relate to. It's a force, it's an energy, it's an essence. And the world and everything you see is an emanation of it. It's a manifestation of it. In which case, when you look at the chair, what do you see? Well, that's the divine essence. And when you look at the building, what do you see? That is also the divine essence. And what do you see when you look at all the people around you? Well, that is exactly the same. That is the divine essence. That is the energy. That is the divine force. Which means, what's the difference between me and the chair? Nothing. Just my perception. All the difference is in my eyes. That actually there is no difference between me and the chair. It is just another manifestation of this energy, this presence. And so if you ask, if you go to Buddhism and say, what is wrong with this world? You'll see the first noble truth there. What's wrong with this world is that there's suffering in this world because of dissatisfaction. What they mean by that is that chair any more valuable than a dog? No, it's not. Is the dog any more valuable than a person? We know it's not. Is one person any more valuable than another person? Well, no, of course they're not. So, like, when I say I want to marry Tanya and not someone else, well, that's madness, because Tanya is just another emanation of this divine essence. And if I decide that I want more gold than mud, well, you're just being silly, because gold and mud are the same divine essence. But what happens is we humans get tricked by these illusions, and we think gold is better than mud. We think one person is better than another animal, or we think a chair is different from. And what Buddhism is saying is, you've fallen for this illusion that actually everything is amazing, because everything is the divine essence. And so you shouldn't want one thing more than another. Everything is equal and should be treated equally amazing. So you shouldn't be dissatisfied if you're in a big house or a small house, or if you have more gold or more mud, or if you're in a relationship with people, or you have a dog, or you sit on a chair. They are all the same thing. The problem of suffering comes is when people fall for the illusion and we want one thing over another. Are you with me so far? And so what Buddhism's, the first noble truth will say is, this world is full of suffering because people are desiring one thing over another, and they're dissatisfied with what they have, and so they're jealous and they go and try and get more for themselves, when really they should all be equally satisfied, because they are all the divine essence. Everything they have is the divine essence. Everything is one. Everything is the same. And so you'll see the second noble truth. The cause of this suffering, the cause of this dissatisfaction, is because of ignorance. We don't see that everything is connected. We don't see that everything is one. We see that chair and we think it's different from Deborah. How silly are we? Do you understand? So it's saying we are ignorant of the connection, and because we're ignorant of the connection, dissatisfaction comes in, suffering comes in. And so I shouldn't be attached to any particular thing, because it's all the divine essence, it's all the divine air. I should be free from any attachment to anything specifically. And so the hope is, third noble truth, if you want to know what salvation is for a Buddhist, it's dissolving back into the oneness of the divine essence. Ceasing to be an individual illusion like this and just dissolving back into the divine essence. It's called nirvana, where I have no attachment to any particular thing. I just dissolve back in. And so the more aware I can be of my interconnectedness with the chair, the dog, the child, the house, everything in creation, that we are all just one, the more I can be aware of that, the more I can detach from desire. Now, it's not saying that you shouldn't love. It's saying that you should love everything as if it's God. And you should love nothing any different. Hit us with thoughts or questions so far.
So would Buddhism believe in marriage?
Again, that's why they're single.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Of a Buddhist monk will be single, because it makes no sense to pick one person over another. It's bad enough that you pick one species over another, but to love preferentially, to put a preference here to say, actually, I love this manifestation of the divine essence, makes no sense. It's why marriage is off the table. It's why possessions are. Why would you try and possess these little manifestations of the divine essence over these ones? They are the same thing. So Buddhism is about detachment.
So, because I know I would have known people who would have converted to Buddhism and sold all their belongings, got rid of everything.
And it's this detachment from desire. It just makes no sense to love one part of the divine essence more than the other.
So would there be a family unit then?
Again, if you...
There are children, so...
Yeah, and if you become a Buddhist monk, so the more you buy into the religion, the more there is the detachment.
Yeah, but I'm thinking of the ordinary Buddhists going around the street, like they're all not monks.
Totally, yeah.
You know, the country is running.
Yeah.
So
There's got to be family.
there's family, yeah. What I'm wondering though is, okay, I commit to Brendan. Would that happen in a Buddhist community, or
Gosh,
So
yeah.
it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That's all different.
And a bit like in the monasteries in Christianity of the past,
Yeah.
it's the higher up you go in the religion, the more you must detach. So in the same ways we had monks in the past who would retreat to and they would see themselves on a higher plane.
Yeah.
For Buddhist communities, the more you want to progress within Buddhism, the more you want to reach nirvana, the more you have to shed the things that you're attached to, whether it's possessions or people. And you dedicate your life to eradicating suffering by teaching people to detach from their desires.
So where does something like a snake bite or something fit into that? When you say suffering, you said that, oh, it's because you want something, but a lot of suffering comes out of nowhere.
Gosh,
You
yeah.
know what I mean? So how do they reconcile something that just happens that's not your fault, for example?
Yeah, and I guess they'd be saying that this ignorance pervades not just humanity. You know, so for the snake to bite, that snake has passed on suffering because it's dissatisfied. It's not detached from desires, and so all the suffering in this world is built around creation as a whole falling for the illusion of individuality and not seeing that we are all this manifestation of one essence.
So the idea of good and evil is an illusion.
Yeah, you won't get a whole. You'll hear much more talk about suffering than good or evil, because again, this isn't a personal God. You know, so and if you don't have a personal God, it's very hard to be firm on what is morally right or morally wrong. What counts for morality in Buddhism is, does it relieve suffering? And the worst thing that causes suffering are desires for specific things. And so desires are the root of evil. Well, the root is the illusion that we are individuals.
How does the economy work? How does people work?
Well, again, for a Buddhist, they will dedicate themselves to relieving suffering. So they don't want to see poverty. They don't want to see wars. They want peace, and which is why. Do you remember what I said Thich Nhat Hanh was nominated for? The Nobel Peace Prize. That actually Buddhism will seek to bring peace in this land. And I mean, war is totally against Buddhism. Imagine two nations so full of desires that they want to hurt each other to gain this bit of land. You know, war for Buddhism is poverty. The rich have money and the poor. You know, this is madness. And so they will be very ambitious people who want to see peace, who want to see an end of suffering. But the salvation is to dissolve back into the divine energy. That there is no longer this illusion of the chair or the geo or the house or anything else. That we dissolve back into nirvana. And so the practice, the fourth noble truth, one of the practices that's at the heart of Buddhism, to feel that interconnectedness with the divine energy, is mindfulness, where you get your breathing right, you get your self-awareness right, you try and detach from specific desires in order to. You'll see a line there at the bottom of the little picture. It's a non-judgmental awareness to transcend the false construction of reality and enjoy being in the moment. That in this moment I can feel one with everything, the divine energy. And that non-judgmental awareness of the moment through mindfulness practice, such as breathing and posture. So while you go through that practice, what you're trying to do is become, in the Buddhist frame of mind, is to become self-aware that you're a part of this divine essence, to be aware of the illusion, and so detach from desire. So you see that you covet the new car. You see that in a non-judgmental way, and okay, that's just me falling for the illusion. The car is neither good nor bad. It's the divine essence. I don't need to long for the car any more than I need to long for a mud pie. They're all the same. And so you are able to transcend all those desires in a non-judgmental way and start to feel in the moment the oneness that you have with everything. Hit us with thoughts.
Well, as a former yoga teacher, which, you know, in one way is the same, but in another way is different, because yoga's Hinduism and they had gods.
Mm-hmm. Lots of them, yeah.
But you just saying about the postures and the breathing, it was the effect of the breathing on the postures or the exercises that you did that opened up those centers to allow the kundalini or the energy to, it's a harder description of it, but to rage through your body like a snake
Mm-hmm.
until it actually, and it was a physical feeling, you know, you would actually feel that. So, you know, that's the exercises was opening it up.
Yeah.
And the ultimate exercise is innocent. It's how they perform that's important.
Sure.
Well, sorry, can I?
Go ahead, Jill.
Can I ask you, what is the point of kindness? What is the point of being kind if we're all, why would you be kind instead of hurting, for example, if we're all just same level?
So I guess if you had to put the chief goal, it is this oneness. And so they don't want competition between two emanations of the one divine presence. In that worldview, it makes no sense for one person to hurt another, for one animal to hurt another, for two nations. They are the same divine essence. And so they want this oneness, this interconnectedness, where there is just this union. Now, it goes back to if this is an impersonal God, there is no right or wrong. You know, if this is just a force of divine energy, an essence, you know, gravity's an energy. When I fight against that, we call it science. You know, it's and to me, this would be one of the inconsistencies in Buddhism. If you have an impersonal God, you've lost any sense of ultimate right and wrong. But in terms of where their worldview would come from, this oneness is that is their nirvana, to dissolve back into the oneness. And so in their framework, it makes no sense for two of those manifestations of the energy to not be kind, because they're one.
Then who do they see Buddha as?
Oh, a great example of how to do this. He's not a god or anything. He's just a great example of one who reached nirvana and enlightenment, and in this life got to such a point where he was in union with the divine essence. So he is the example to aspire to.
You know, in China, you have these big, these kind of golden statues. What's the point of what is that about? Big golden. Yeah, that
Of Buddhas.
Yeah, that are like a building was built for them.
Not sure. Not sure.
Like temples.
If they're temples, then those temples will be the place to get close to that oneness, the nirvana centers, if you like. But what the goal is, in all the mindfulness stuff that is at the heart of Buddhism, is trying to see past the illusion and feel the union with the divine essence in its purity, in its without the illusions, without the constructed individualism, and just dissolve back in. Now that's really important to remember, that when Thomas Merton and Thich Nhat Hanh got together, as you read David talk about going into the sanctuary and gazing on the beauty of God and seeking his presence, David is longing to commune with God and to feel the union that he has with God. But that is a million miles away from what Buddha is trying to do. Buddha is trying to do, and there are similar words. There is the union and the experience of oneness, and there's similar words, but they're meaning two very different things. David is longing to commune with the personal creator God, and Buddha is seeking to dissolve and lose himself into a nothingness where he blends and dissolves into a divine force, energy, essence. But they sound similar. And so when we're thinking of this picture here, and the fact that Thich Nhat Hanh and Buddhism, all the things that we experience today, whether it's centering prayer, contemplative prayer, mindfulness in medicine, or evangelical mindfulness, we have to at least be aware of what it has been filtered through. Because there are lots of these ideas that sound very similar to Christianity, but are hugely different. Because what it means is, I have grass at home, I have a cat, I have daughters, I have a wife. What does Buddhism say about each of those? It's just, if I really believe, if I climb the ladder of Buddhism, I should see behind the illusion, and the grass, and Tanya, and Lola Rosemary, and Pippa, and Smudge the cat, and the soil. I should treat them all with the same respect, that they are the divine essence. We are all one. And if only I could get mindfully beyond the illusion, I could see reality for what it is. That's actually really scary and dark.
Everything is special, there's nothing is special.
Nothing is special.
And I think there must be a lot of disillusioned Buddhists out there, because they just can't, especially now with television and the influence from the West.
Gosh,
It's very hard not to want more.
And yet, I reckon there's that disillusionment you're talking about with those who are deep into it. But on the surface, to the Western world that has been saturated in a nasty individualism, when people start coming along and say, we are one. Yeah. When there's been such, whether it's the treatment of women or races or sexualities or whatever it is in the news, someone comes along and says, we have to realize we are one. There should be peace. Why are we fighting? And we're saying, that sounds amazing. But they mean something very different by it. And actually, when you dig away at it, you're saying, actually, we're one in such a way that we don't even exist. We're just illusions, we're just emanations, and we'll dissolve back in and lose all that individuality and just dissolve back into an essence of force and energy. Actually, that's not nice. That's a terrible way to see people. But to a Western world that's been broken by a nasty individualism, this sounds amazing. What I want to pick up is this idea that the mindfulness at the heart of Buddhism is a tool to detach from desire. all those feelings that we have inside. Mindfulness is a tool to detach from desire. Christianity is a religion full of desire. Desire is at the heart. Did you hear those verses I read about my soul longs, it thirsts. It's like in a dry and weary and parched land, my soul craves, longs. That, love God with all your heart, mind, soul. Love your neighbor as that love and desire is at the heart of Christianity. What's also at the heart of the Christian message is that sin is a corrupt desire. That actually sin gets into desire and corrupts it so that we love what we shouldn't love, or we love it in a way that we shouldn't love. And so Christianity is we are created to desire, to love, but sin breaks that, and so our desires are corrupted and messed up and love the wrong thing or in the wrong way. Buddhism says all desire is an illusion, or should be an illusion. It should be detached from, because it's connected to something that's an illusion. Now, those two approaches to desire are as different as you could get. Christianity wants to redeem desire. Buddhism wants to detach from it. And mindfulness is a tool to detach from it. And so what we can't do is we can't take a tool that is designed for something we are totally opposed to and just pick it up and set it down into our faith. Can't do that. That's not the same as saying there is nothing redeemable about this tool. And so what I want us to think about is Buddhism. You don't want to go near with a barge pole. There is no good news in that religion. And we can't simply take the tool of here and pop it in here, because that tool is designed to do something we don't want it to do. The question that we started with last week, and the question that's really hard, is when we engage with it, do we simply take the tool and pop it in and say, brilliant, we've got a new tool? Do we take the tool and smash it and say, we don't want that tool? Or is there a way to redeem that tool? That's the question that we want to play with. So if you flick over to this one here, the body. You see those 4 emojis, fear, sadness, anger, guilt? Are they good or bad?
In the Buddhist way of thinking, or
In Christianity.
in Christianity? No, they're good.
Okay.
In the right context, they're good.
Do you know, I love to ask that question to children, and they always say they're bad. That should jump out. Do you remember when Jesus was scared? Where was that? Yeah, probably on the cross. We're told explicitly in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he's the anxiety, he's sweating drops of blood. He's so scared. That man was terrified. I'm sure he was terrified on the cross as well. But the place we're told about it is in the garden. Was he ever sad?
Jerusalem, how I long for you to gather you as a hen gathers
Just
the
checks. He weeps for Jerusalem. Where else does he weep? Jesus wept. When his friend Lazarus died in the tomb, Jesus wept. Ever angry? Turned it to, you've turned my house into angry anywhere else?
Jesus was moved at the tomb of Lazarus. He was angry with his death.
Yeah.
He was angry that this thing had happened, or that this situation should be.
Angry at death, yeah. Mark 3:6, when the Pharisees and the Sadducees are having a go, he looks at them with anger because they're trying to stop him doing what's right. So fear, sadness, anger, if we think they're bad things, like, what are we going to do with Jesus? He never felt guilty because he didn't sin. But do you remember when David went with Bathsheba and killed Uriah? And after Nathan confronts him, he writes a couple of psalms. And as he reflects on that time between when he killed Uriah and before Nathan confronted him, I think Psalm 51, where he says, God, you put such a burden on me. It was like my bones were crushing. The guilt was killing him. Like his body was actually being crushed by the weight of the guilt of what he had done. And you say, in that situation, is guilt good or is guilt bad? Well, in that situation, that guilt, that panging of the conscience is a gift from God that should drive him to confess his sins before the Lord. When are each of these things bad? Is it possible for guilt to be bad? I hope so, because I feel it all the time when I shouldn't. Do you know when you've messed up again and you've come before the throne of grace and you've asked for forgiveness, and yet there is still this weight of shame and guilt, and that guilt needs to be soothed at the foot of the cross to see the resurrected Christ who says, I know what it is to be tempted, and yet he invites us to come for new mercy. And so it's not enough just to say, are they good or are they bad? Actually, there are times where these things are gifts from God. They are entirely appropriate and right, and it would be actively wrong if they weren't there. If Jesus stood beside Lazarus' grave or looking at Jerusalem that had rejected him and was like, you win some, you lose some, you wouldn't look and think, well, gosh, there's the height of holiness. You think, have you no heart? When he's in the Garden of Gethsemane and he knows that in the hours ahead he is going to face the wrath of his Father, if he's sitting there chilling out, having a cup of tea, saying, take it in my stride, you'd be like, what? That these emotions are given to us for a reason. And yet, it is these very emotions that destroy us. Have you ever been filled with anxiety? Or such a downcast spirit that you don't want to get out of bed? Or such rage that you feel that you could blow up if someone just looked at you sideways? Or such deep shame that you can't look people in the eye, you daren't look in the mirror? That these things that are gifts from God are also the very things that destroy us most. And the best, I'm sure you've heard me talk about this before, the best way I can explain this is that these are gifts from God and they are alarms to say something is wrong. And it was a couple of weeks ago, our stove was open too long and the smoke was coming out, and the fire alarm started going off in the hall. Would that hurt your ears? I don't think anyone's sitting underneath that alarm saying, this is lovely. It's terrible, it feels horrible, but I'm glad it's there. These alarms are given by God to say something is wrong. That when Jesus was facing the cross, something is wrong. When Jesus is standing beside his best friend's grave or looking at Jerusalem, something is wrong. When he's in the temple and they turned the house of prayer into a den of robbers, something's wrong. When David has killed Uriah and he's trying to hide, something is wrong. These alarms are designed to ring off the hook to say something is wrong and you need to do something about it. Problem is, in the same way, on a Saturday morning when we stick the toast in the toaster and we leave it in too long and it starts to smoke just a little bit and it hits the, if you haven't got heat alarms in and you've still got smoke alarms in your kitchen and it hits the smoke alarm, what happens? Does the smoke alarm say, don't worry about it, I know it's just toast? Or does it ring nice and gentle and say, I'm a wee bit concerned about the toaster, would you... It rings off the hook as if the entire building was on fire. And see these alarms that God has given us. You see, as kids, as we're growing up, we have these alarms. You ever seen a 3-year-old whose older sister, this is totally made up, took her piece of Lego? And it's like the devastation and the anger. If she was a king right now, there would be world war. The ferocity that this great betrayal can only be matched by slaughter. That is the only answer to this injustice. And her angry alarm is ringing off the hook as if the greatest injustice had been done to her in that moment. Because when we come into this world as kids, our alarms are like that basic alarm that's in the kitchen. It rings when there's trouble. And it doesn't matter whether the entire house is burning down or whether there's just the slightest, faintest little bit of smoke coming from the toaster. It sounds the same and it feels the same. Now, that is a huge implication for how we deal with children who are scared, sad, angry, and guilty. But that's not where it stops, because you see, our fire alarms aren't like the one in the ceiling. We calibrate our fire alarms. Because our fire alarms are amazing, that you can actually calibrate them. You can wave the smoke away and actually teach it that, when you're in school and you get up in front of the class to read, that your life is not in danger, even though it feels like it. And if they calibrate it right, the next time they get up, it'll ring a little bit less. And the next time it'll get up, it'll ring a little bit less. And they've trained the fire alarm that standing up in front of a class is not the end of their life. It's not a question of whether they get calibrated. It's whether they get calibrated well. I've said before, I had an amazing coach in athletics. And I can still remember going to that big stadium for the first time, and I was about to die on the inside. And he taught me how to breathe, how to calm my body down and sort it out. And there was another lad who was equally about to die. But he didn't have a coach like mine. And so he vomited. Like, the anxiety, so bad, he vomited. And he was, fine back in the race. What happened the next time he was in that stadium? He's been racing for years. And what happens when he goes to the big stadiums? That's just what he does. Vomits. Because his fire alarm is calibrated now that when you walk and you see the stadium, your life is in danger. He knows in his head it's not. But his alarm has been calibrated that way. That when you walk into that stadium, this is what happens. Your life is in danger. And he can say in his head, I know my life's not in danger. I've been racing for 6 years. I know nothing's wrong. And yet, when he gets there, the anxiety will go through the roof and boom, gone. It's not a question of whether they get calibrated. It's whether they get calibrated well or badly. And last summer, I was in a different place. I was teaching a course on parenting. And we were going through some of this. And one of the dads put up his hand in total honesty and says, I get it. I'm with you. But I don't even know how to calibrate mine. never mind my children's. And we go through life, and it kind of just happens naturally, but that doesn't mean it happens well. And so if you had to pull out, what are some of the biggest struggles that people go through today? Do you see those 4 emojis? Anxiety, that downcast, depressed spirit, that anger, rage management, that deep shame that's seated in our souls. Actually, those are the 4 biggest things that we struggle with. And these are gifts from God that we haven't calibrated right. And we can forget why they ring. During lockdown, I remember one time I was making breakfast on a Saturday morning, and Lola Rose came up and she used the wrong fork to stir the egg. And me being an idiot barked at her and said, "That's the wrong fork." And she sat down and she walked away. And the day was grand. That was, 8 o'clock in the morning. At 4 o'clock, we were lying on the trampoline. And things just didn't seem right. Body language wasn't quite right, wasn't the normal bubbly self, wasn't giving jip. It was just sort of, and I said, "Are you all right?" He said, "Yeah, grand." I said, "Well, you don't seem all right." He said, "I think I'm fine." I said, "It's just, normally your shoulders are like this, they're like this. And normally your head's like this, and it's like this. And normally your face is like this, and it's like this." She said, "I don't know, I think I'm all right, maybe just a bit tired, I don't know, but I think I'm fine." I said, "Well, are you scared?" "No." "You angry?" "No." "Guilty?" "No." "Sad?" "I don't know." I said, "I think you may be sad." What made you sad?" She said, "Nothing." I said, "Well, did you wake up sad?" And she was like, "No, I woke up good because we were thinking about this and doing this. And I woke up sad." And then I said, "Well, can you think of any?" And before I'd finished the sentence, she said, "Fork." I said, "What's that now?" "Fork?" She said, "It was the fork." I said, when I shouted about the fork, she said, "Yeah." I said, "Why did that make you sad?" And she said, "I just so wanted to help, but I do everything wrong." I said, you couldn't remember the fork when I asked you, could you?" She said, "No, I couldn't remember the fork." See, her head couldn't remember, but her body remembered. And then we talked about it. I said, "See that fork? That wasn't about you. That was about me being grumpy and stupid. And I was frustrated about something else, and then I saw you pick up the wrong fork. And instead of thanking you for, no one asked you to come and help me, and yet you did. And instead of thanking you, I was annoyed about this thing over here, and I took it out on you. That wasn't about you. That was about me. Thank you so much for helping me when no one asked you to. See that fork? That wasn't about you messing everything up. That was about you being kind and me taking out my struggles on you." And do you know what happened? It wasn't long before the shoulders went back up and the head came back up and we had her back. But can you imagine that feeling staying? And the next day something else happens. And it feeds into the story, "I'm rubbish, I do everything wrong." And the next day something else happens, it feeds into the story, until eventually there's just this alarm ringing slowly, quietly in the background all the time. This little sad alarm that never goes off. You see, these alarms, they are gifts from God, but they are really, really hard to calibrate. And we've only got 8 minutes left. Where mindfulness comes in, and we'll start this, but the kids are going to descend on us any second. Where mindfulness comes in, some of the thoughts, is they have developed a tool to detach desires. I don't want that tool. But in all the work I do as a parent, as a friend, as a pastor, so much of it is based around calibrating those feelings, those desires. And you see this picture at the bottom, the Wheel of Awareness. That's from a totally secular book that has interacted with Thich Nhat Hanh's mindfulness and tried to develop it into a secular Western medical psychiatry tool to help people. Now, if you can see the center of it, that's what he talks about, awareness. And then if you imagine the outer ring, that's what you are aware of. So your five senses, your bodily sensation. Have you ever felt like sad and your stomach sore, or your head sore, or you're going through grief and your chest is just ready to cave in? Do you know there are sensations in your body connected with how you're feeling? So there's the the five senses. There's the senses that are in your body. There's the feelings that you actually go through, sort of mental activities. That's the seventh sense. He then has this interconnection. That's kind of how you're related to other things. But you see there's a wee spoke coming out that connects our ability to be aware with the things that we are aware of. He says that spoke is really important because here's what happens. You see on the outer rim, say if I'm feeling stressed, what happens is that stress becomes such a strong alarm that my entire world is consumed by it. It's like I become it. It's not so much that I'm aware of it, but that it is all that my life's experience is of that moment. That no matter what I think about, it's stuck there. And what he describes is that idea of we become stuck. So if someone has said that terrible thing to me, all we can think about is what has been said, and we get stuck there. And we try and get off it, but we just keep coming back. And we should be aware of what's going on around us. But when one of these alarms goes off, it's like we get so stuck there, it becomes our reality, and we don't know what to do with it. And what he's trying to do with this wheel of awareness is to try and get unstuck. And that those emotions, those alarms are there to serve us rather than take us prisoner. And so if you look at the fear, the sadness, the anger, the guilt, have you ever been in one of those states and it becomes all-consuming? That actually those alarms start to control us. And we get so stuck, so fixated there that we can't shift them. And what some of the mindfulness stuff can be used for is not so much to detach from desire, but to get unstuck from it so that we can process it and so that we can calibrate it. Hit me with thoughts. We haven't got into what it will look like, but hit me with thoughts on those ideas for a second.
Mindfulness is a kind of a tool to get you out of some of these thoughts, isn't it? Some of these.
Yeah. So this in particular is a tool to be aware of what's going on and to get unstuck. Now, next time we'll look at how you actually do it. But what they've tried to do is take a tool from Buddhism that detaches from a desire. And they've tweaked that tool, not so much to detach from desire, but to stop getting stuck. Not so that you can discard it, but actually so you can process it. Have you ever been so anxious that you just can't process it? Or so angry you just can't process it? That you're absolutely stuck there, that it becomes so consuming. Hit us with thoughts.
Is it not better though, like the psalmist, who sort of says, "Soul, why are you so cast down?" And start to have this dialogue with oneself to come to a better place, to actually see things as God sees them.
Yeah, I
But you are having that inner conversation with yourself.
love that. And if you were saying, how could you use this as a Christian? See to have that discussion and to have that wrestling with God. There comes a point sometimes where the emotion is so overwhelming that you can't even get there. So what I would be pushing for is not this or that, but I have sat with clergy who would take nothing to do with this and have said exactly that, Psalm 46, and yet they're going off on sick leave because of stress. Because whatever stress they have been going through has so consumed them that their body is breaking. And how do you take someone whose body is just ringing off the hook to get them to the place where they can sit down with God to process? And so when we push this next time, what we don't want to be saying is, do this instead of Psalm 46. But that actually, these emotions are so powerful that if they haven't been calibrated right, they are so overpowering and such a mystery to us. And in fact, like Augustine talks quite like Psalm 46. And he says, I asked my soul, why are you so sad? And it wouldn't answer me. I then commanded it to put its hope in God, and it told me to get lost. Where he's trying and he's wrestling with it, but they are so overpowering that the body won't listen back. Hit us with more thoughts.
So are you trying to then get things back to concentrating on the five senses, or what? Where? I'm trying to get an idea of what you're trying to move the needle from.
Love it, yeah. Okay, imagine someone has been really, really deeply hurt. So, do you remember the fork story? Right? I hope I'm not a terrible dad, right? But even that story is being told I'm rubbish, okay? Imagine I was even worse as a father. Beat my children, did all sorts of stuff. You imagine the alarm bells and the stories that are going through that child as they grow up. And what happens is, you see when those alarms are constantly ringing off the hook, it's unbearable. So do you know what your body does? It tunes them all down. The problem is your body works as one, and so when you tune down all those hurt, you tune down everything. So you'll find that trauma victims, not only are they numb on the inside, they can be blissfully on it. They can bump into stuff. You can touch them and they don't know that you're there. Because all the senses get numbed. That when these alarm bells are ringing off the hook, you have to numb everything. And so actually when Daniel Segal is working with trauma victims, before you get to opening up the numbness in here, you have to teach them to engage their senses again, because the whole thing's connected. And so what happens if these alarm bells have been let ring for years? That's unbearable. And so the body tries to numb them. Doesn't deal with them, numbs them. But if you numb them, you numb everything. And so for proper engagement to happen, you have to start being self-aware, not just of the deep trauma that's in here, not just of the deep stories, but actually what you touch and what you hear and what you feel. because the body's working as a whole. And the difficulty is someone who has had those alarm bells ringing for years can be so numb on the inside that they need tools to start to become self-aware so that they can become self-controlled. Because it's been too hard to live in here for too long. Hit us with more thoughts.
Yeah, I'm having a situation, you know, where I think of, I was in an organisation where there was a very, very, very stressful time. And it got to the stage that I couldn't sit in that place without shaking
Yeah.
like that. And you know, for a long meetings then became the problem, the fear. Didn't matter what meeting, but it took a long time for me to be able to even sit
Yeah.
in a business meeting here
Yeah.
in Woodlands. But it was the people that were here that showed there was nothing to be afraid of, you know. And I mean, I'm not shy,
Gosh, yeah.
but it was just the experience of
Yeah.
the other
No.
organisation.
I love that. And the next time we do this, when I push this, I want to push more the connection between what you've got straight in your head, what you've got straight in your heart, how your body is connected with that, and how other people are connected with that. Because often we can embrace a spirituality that's quite, if you just believe the right things, it'll be grand. Without appreciating just how much the body is connected to our mind and what we love and what we're scared of. Because when you feel those big, strong emotions, your body feels it. And God has designed us in an amazing way. But we're not just, the phrase is, we're not just a brain on a stick. That actually our body is working together. And if my alarm is ringing off the hook and I'm terrified, I can say to myself till I'm blue in the face, it's safe, it's safe, it's safe, it's safe. My head is saying it's safe and my body is screaming at me, you are about to die. Have you ever seen a kid in total panic stricken? Do you tell them you're safe? Or do you tell them, take a deep breath? Because if you tell them it's safe, you can tell them that till you're blue in the face. You got to get them to take a deep breath first and calm their body down. Then you can tell them what's true. But if you're going to try and tell them what's true when their body is going ballistic, I'll tell you what they're going to listen to. They're going to listen to their body. And next week, I want to push more what this wheel of awareness looks like. It's totally secular. It's taken from Thich Nhat Hanh's filtered through Western medicine. And I hope it's clear tonight, I am no fan of Buddhism. And the tool that takes desire and detaches it, I don't want that tool. But actually, that tool's interesting. I wonder, can we modify that tool, not to detach from desire, but to get unstuck from it so that we can process it? Hit us with final questions.
As regards, you see, the nirvana box and nirvana stuff. So as regards like the Buddhism, do they have an end goal? See the way, for example, taking Christianity and Islam, you have our end goal with afterlife, which is mostly heaven. But I know you obviously go to eternal life, but you know, Islam is paradise. So to Buddhism, do they believe that they're going to go to somewhere, or is it just their life is just focused on that nirvana and that's divine stuff and whatever?
Yeah, that is their hope, that they will cease, that I will cease to be and dissolve back into this force. And so they certainly won't be aware of themselves because Colin would no longer exist. And so it is a dissolving back into a force.
So they're continuing life through what they really like. They're not aware of themselves. Like, see, in Christianity, you know, we're aware, you know, where we're going to and everything, and when we're there,
Yep.
you know, we're aware of our lives, but they are not aware of
Yeah, and that word life, that's what a personal being has, life. And so it's not even that they continue life, because this divine essence is not personal. It is not a life. It is a force and essence, and energy is the best words that we can use to describe it. And so, go ahead, Darren.
Reincarnation of it.
Oh, so
So just going around in a circle sort of thing.
well, for those who believe in reincarnation, yes, you might not get out of the trip this time, and you have to come back. But for Buddhism, the ultimate goal is that you would be freed from this life to dissolve back into this essence. So I would cease to be as a person. Go ahead, Anne.
Imagine you're 98 or 99 and you're thinking, when am I ever going to reach nirvana?
And I will cease to be when I do. And so I don't know if you've seen Star Wars. You know, the Force is, you know, Star Wars is a blend of Christianity and Buddhism. The Force being a sort of, there is this thing that connects us all, and yet it's got a Messiah, you know, idea to it. The Matrix, if you've seen The Matrix, you know, this whole thing is an illusion. There is a reality behind it. Buddhism is creeping into Western culture in all sorts of ways. And like I say, next week, or not next week, but the week after, we're going to push this a bit more. But please hear this of, however fearful you are of Buddhism, I am more. That the last thing I want to do is take something from here and pop it in here. But what the best of Christianity has done through the ages is engage with culture to redeem it. And my gut is, there is a tool in here. And it's a bit like, you know, a hammer can be used to destroy or to build. And if you were building it to destroy, you might build it in a certain way. If you're designing it to build, you might design it in a slightly different way. My gut is there's a tool here that's used for a bad thing, but could be modified to use it for a positive thing.
I can't believe that there isn't such a tool to be found in Scripture, because God has given us Scriptures for all of that. I'm not, yeah, so surely we should be looking for that which gives us the same, only that we can find it here.
So I love that idea of trying to figure out, what is this? What is this? Is this a manual or a lens? So when I look at Psalm 139 and I see, I was knit together in my mother's womb, I am wonderfully and fearfully made. And then as I study what a good diet is and what good health is, and go to see medicine, and I see this amazing body that God has wired together, I don't have a manual in here of how everything works together, but I know that the way that God has designed the body is amazing. Broken as it is, it's amazing. And what this is not prayer. You know, this isn't a type of prayer. This is on a par with, as we figure out how amazing the body is in different types of medicine. We figure out, if you do this exercise, it's good, and actually if you do this, it's bad for your neck. That we're also figuring out, how do we manage and direct these wonderful gifts that God has wired into the body. And so in the I'm taking this as a lens, as opposed to a manual, to understand. I know I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, but I want to understand how. I want to understand the details of it. Show me this amazing body that God has designed. And it is amazing. You know, there's so much in the Bible about being self-controlled. Like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks self-control. And we know that control comes with understanding. You know, I've said it before, the power tools that we use are amazing if we understand them. If we don't understand them, we can't control And so when the Bible's talking about self-control, one of the things that we need is self-understanding, self-awareness. And so I want to know this wonderful humanity that God has created. I want to know the details of what that's like. And so maybe in 100 years, we'll learn more about emotions and desires, and we'll be better equipped to see how to understand them and handle them. In the same way, we might know more about diet and exercise, and we might get a picture fleshed out of what Psalm 130, to be fearfully and wonderfully made, looks like. Gio, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, sorry. I suppose there's something I feel about thinking about self is that I mistrust that. Because I feel as a Christian, you know, we're supposed to be focused on God. So that would hold me back. But one of the things that I feel is your talk about the emojis up there. Sometimes when something bad is happening in your life or whatever, the thing I hate about that is that it makes you think about the world in relation to you, and it makes you think about yourself all the time. And that is exhausting. That is
Oh, I love that.
you know, too much. That is overwhelming in itself, to be thinking about yourself. So that's,
Yeah.
I will be interested to see how that wheel fits in, because instinctively I'm
Yeah.
going to say, I don't need any encouragement to think any more about myself.
And
That's kind of what I'm saying.
Gio, you've hit the nail on the head, and the best way I can describe this is, I've had trouble with my elbow for a long time, and see, when I did the house renovations, I didn't do all the exercise that I should have done to make it healthy and all that sort of. And so in the middle of the renovation, my elbow was screaming at me, right, because it was broken. And what I did was shush. Do you think that worked? The more I said shush and just carried on, I damaged it more and more and more and more. And the more I did it, the more that elbow would scream at me. And then I took a bit of time to do the exercise the physio had told me 10 years that I should do. And I gave it a little bit of a rest, and I treated it. And as it got treated, do you know what happened? I didn't even know I had an elbow. And here's what happens, is when we don't look at the heart and what's going on and deal with and understand ourselves, when we don't do that, all sorts of stuff is going on. And there's no healing, there's no help. And what it does is it screams out there is something wrong and you're not listening. When actually you do this, it doesn't create more of an inward focus. What happens is when healing comes, those things stop screaming at you. And so often we're told, forget about the self rather than let the gospel be the balm of Gilead that heals the self. Because when that gospel healing comes, that rest for the soul, the elbow stops screaming at you. And actually you think about it less. And if we don't take care of these things will scream at us for the rest of our lives. Because they're not being healed. Can we finish? Let me pray. Because your love is better than life, my lips will glorify you. Heavenly Father, thank you for your goodness. Lord, you know each of our struggles. You know the burdens that we carry. Father, we want to be the people that you've made us to be. You have made us fearfully and wonderfully. We're made in your image. And yet, Lord, we are broken. We're broken in sin. And yet you forgive us. And Father, thank you for that redemption. Thank you for that forgiveness. And Lord, as we grow in our knowledge of you and who you are, give us rest for our souls. Bring healing into our hearts. Lord, those burdens we carry, we lay them before you. Teach us your ways. In Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. The kids are